Cadillac glided through the quiet streets of Tupelo, Mississippi, a stark contrast to the roaring crowds and flashing lights Elvis Presley had grown accustomed to. He sat in the backseat, a man in his prime, though a little wearier than the eager young singer who'd left this town so many years ago. His hair, still dark and iconic, was a bit longer now, the sideburns as distinctive as ever, but his eyes behind the tinted glasses held a quiet yearning. He told his manager, Colonel Parker, it was just a quick trip, a little R&R, maybe see some old friends. But the truth was, a deeper, almost primal pull had drawn him back. Graceland, for all its grandeur and comfort, sometimes felt like a gilded cage. He missed the quiet simplicity, the genuine warmth of a time. He missed Tupelo. As the car turned onto a familiar street, a shiver ran down his spine. The houses were older, some new. But the air felt the same, hot, humid, thick with the scent of pine and honeysuckle. It was the smell of childhood. We're almost there. Here. His driver, a quiet man named Billy, said, glancing in the rearview mirror. Billy had been with him for years, a trusted shadow. He knew Elvis's moods, knew when to talk and when to just drive. Elvis nodded, his throat feeling a little tight. He'd insisted on coming alone, or as alone as a superstar could be. No entourage, no reporters, just Billy and the ghosts of his past. He'd even called ahead, arranging for the little house to be opened up, just for him. For a few hours of undisturbed peace, he saw the street sign first, Old Saltillo Road. His breath hitched. It was just a narrow stretch of asphalt now, but in his mind, it was still a dirt track, dusty in summer, muddy in spring, leading to a tiny, humble home, a home that held every single one of his first memories. He remembered walking this road as a boy, scuffing his bare feet in the dirt, the sun hot on his head. He remembered the sound of laughter from the neighbors' yards, the distant rumble of a train, the ever-present drone of cicadas. Life had been simple then, full of small joys and big dreams. The car slowed, then pulled to the side of the road. There it was, the small two-room shotgun house, nestled among a few scraggly trees. It looked smaller than he remembered, like a dollhouse. Yet it pulsed with a silent energy, a lifetime of memories waiting to be rediscovered. He pushed open the car door, the rich leather scent of the Cadillac replaced by the earthy smell of the Mississippi soil. The air was heavy, humid, pressing in on him like a warm blanket. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. This wasn't just a house. It was the birthplace of Elvis Presley, the place where Vernon and Gladys had brought their twin boys into the world, where one had lived and the other had been called home. He walked slowly, deliberately towards the worn wooden gate, his expensive leather shoes crunching on the gravel path. Each step felt heavy, burdened by the weight of time and memory. He thought of all the times he'd run through this gate as a boy, full of boundless energy, chasing imaginary monsters or playing hide-and-seek with the neighborhood kids. Now his pace was measured, almost reverent. The porch stood before him, weathered and worn, the paint peeling in places. He remembered sitting on those steps, watching the world go by, dreaming of far-off places. He remembered his mother, Gladys, sitting there too, shelling peas or mending clothes, her soft voice humming a gospel hymn. Her presence felt so strong, almost palpable, that he half expected to see her there, waiting for him. He reached out a hand, his fingers tracing the rough texture of the wooden railing. It felt cool beneath his touch, solid and unchanging. The world might have spun wildly around him for the past decades, but this railing, these steps, this house, they had remained. They were a tether to his past, a grounding force he hadn't realized he so desperately needed. A deep sigh escaped his lips. This was it, the very beginning, and for the first time in a long time, Elvis Presley felt less like the king of rock and roll and more like a boy named Elvis Aaron, coming home. He reached for the doorknob, his heart thumping a strange rhythm against his ribs. It was old brass, tarnished with age. He turned it slowly, the click echoing in the stillness. The door creaked open, revealing a shadowy interior. The smell that greeted him wasn't dust or decay, but Something else, entirely. Something deep, earthy, and strangely comforting. It smelled like home. It smelled like his mother. He took another deep breath and stepped inside, leaving the blinding sun and the weight of the world behind him. He was finally back. Stepping over the threshold felt like crossing a boundary not just in space, but in time. The small entryway, barely more than a tiny square, plunged him into a cool, muted light. The air inside was still heavy with the quiet dignity of a place that had witnessed so much. It was the silence of history, of untold stories echoing in the corners. His eyes slowly adjusted. The walls were painted a pale, almost cream color, a far cry from the vibrant patterns and plush textures of Graceland. There was a simple worn rug on the floor. Everything was sparse, functional, exactly as it would have been for a working-class family struggling to make ends meet in the Depression era. Yet, in his memory, it had never felt sparse. It had felt full of love, full of life, full of hope. He moved into the front room, which served as both living room and sometimes an extra sleeping area. 2 small windows, draped with simple curtains, let in soft shafts of light that illuminated dust motes dancing in the air. Plain wooden tables stood against one wall, a couple of chairs pulled up to it. In his mind's eye, he saw his father, Vernon, sitting there, poring over numbers, trying to stretch every dollar. He saw his mother, Gladys, perhaps darning socks, her face illuminated by the soft glow of a kerosene lamp. In the evenings, electricity had been a luxury, something they barely had. The room was undeniably small. It struck him how different it was from the sprawling rooms of Graceland, the vast open spaces, the high ceilings. Here, everything was close, intimate. You could practically reach out and touch every wall from the center of the room. This closeness had forced them together, creating an unbreakable bond. He ran a hand over the smooth, cool surface of the wooden table. It wasn't fancy, just simple pine, probably handmade by Vernon or a neighbor. But it was where they ate, where they talked, where they were a family. He remembered sitting here as a boy, sometimes doing his homework by the light of that lamp, sometimes just listening to his parents talk, their voices low and comforting. He could almost hear the faint rustle of his mother's dress as she moved about, the quiet murmur of his father's voice. He could almost smell the simple hearty meals Gladys used to cook. Beans and cornbread, fried chicken. On a good day, these weren't just mental images, they were visceral sensations, brought to life by the very air of the house. Every object, every worn patch on the floor seemed to whisper a story. He remembered the small portable radio they had tuning in to Grand Ole Opry, the sounds of country and gospel music filling this very room. That was where it all began, wasn't it? Listening to those melodies, feeling the rhythm deep in his bones long before he ever held a guitar. He walked over to one of the windows, pushing aside the curtain gently. Outside, the world had changed, but from this vantage point, looking out onto the small patch of yard, it felt timeless. He remembered playing here, building forts, digging for buried treasures that were never found. He remembered the feeling of the warm sun on his face, the taste of dust on his tongue, the freedom of being a child with no concept of fame or fortune. A profound sense of gratitude washed over him. This house, this simple, humble place, had nurtured him. It had given him roots, a foundation of love, and values that had carried him through the dizzying heights of superstardom. No matter how many mansions he owned, how many expensive cars he drove, this tiny house remained the most precious possession in his heart. He turned from the window, his gaze sweeping across the room again. It wasn't just a house, it was a sanctuary, a place where a shy, sensitive boy was loved fiercely, where dreams were whispered in the dark, and where the seed of a future legend was first planted. He imagined his parents in this room, young and hopeful, facing the challenges of life with courage and faith. They had so little, yet they gave so much. They gave him everything that truly mattered. His eyes landed on a small empty space on the wall, above what would have been a small fireplace or a simple wood-burning stove. He remembered a picture hanging there, a faded photograph of his parents when they were even younger. It was just a small detail, but it brought a fresh wave of emotion. He closed his eyes for a moment, letting the silence of the house envelop him. It was a comforting silence, not an empty one. It was filled with the echoes of laughter, of gentle words, of the lullabies his mother sang. This was the quiet that his soul craved, a balm for the constant noise of his life. He knew what lay beyond this room, the bedroom, the kitchen, each holding more memories, more poignant whispers from the past. He was ready to face them, to walk through the echoes of his own history, and to remember the boy he once was before the world demanded he become the king. He was ready to reconnect with the heart of Elvis Aaron Presley. Right here, in this little house on Old Saltillo Road. With a deep breath, Elvis stepped deeper into the house, moving from the main living area towards the small bedroom. Transition was immediate. The already dim light lessened even further, and the air seemed to grow even heavier with the weight of profound personal history. This wasn't just a room. It was the sacred space where his life had begun. The bedroom was tiny, barely big enough for a single bed, let alone the full-sized one that would have occupied it when he was a child. He remembered his parents, Vernon and Gladys, sharing this bed, and later, when he was older, sometimes he would sleep in the room with them or on a cot in the main room. Privacy was a luxury they couldn't afford. But what they lacked in space, they made up for in closeness. He could almost see the simple quilt on the bed, handmade by Gladys, patched together from scraps of old clothing, each stitch a testament to her love and resourcefulness. He imagined the worn wooden floorboards beneath their bare feet, cold in winter, cool in summer. His eyes fell upon the exact spot where his bed would have been. Not a grand ornate bed like the ones at Graceland, but a simple cot or mattress on the floor, or perhaps a small wooden frame. It was here, in this very spot, that he would wake up to the first light of dawn filtering through the single window. It was here he would whisper his dreams into the darkness, dreams of a different life, though he couldn't yet articulate what that life would be. He remembered the feeling of safety and warmth in this room nestled between his loving parents. Gladys would often sing to him soft gospel hymns or lullabies, her voice a gentle balm that chased away any shadows. He could still hear it, faint but clear. A melody from a distant past. Then his gaze shifted to the wall where a faded photograph of his twin brother Jesse Guerin might have hung. The thought of Jesse always brought a quiet ache to his heart. Born just 35 minutes before him, Jesse had not survived. He was a silent presence in Elvis's life, a twin flame extinguished too soon yet never forgotten. He remembered his mother speaking of Jesse, her voice tinged with a delicate sadness, but also with a quiet acceptance of God's will. She often said that a part of Jesse lived on in him, that he had to live for two. That belief had always been a quiet pressure, a profound responsibility, but also a source of deep love and connection to his family. It fueled his ambition, in a way. He wanted to make them proud, to make up for the dreams Jesse never got to live. He reached out and touched the cool, smooth plaster of the wall right where Jesse's photo would have been. He closed his eyes, imagining the tiny, fragile infant. He wondered what Jesse would have been like if he would have shared his love for music, if they would have been inseparable, two halves of a whole. The what-ifs were endless and always painful. He opened his eyes, a tear pricking at the corner. This room wasn't just about his childhood. It was about loss and resilience, and the power of a mother's enduring love. Gladys had faced such hardship, losing a child, living in poverty. Yet she never let it break her spirit. She was his rock, his anchor. He could almost feel her hand in his, guiding him. He recalled waking up on cold mornings, snuggled under the patched quilt, and the smell of coffee brewing in the next room, and the soft sounds of his mother beginning her day. It was a simple symphony of life, played out in this tiny, humble space. He turned slowly, taking in every detail, the bare floor, the simple window, no clauses, just a case. And yet this room, more than any other, felt like the true heart of his being. This was where he had taken his first breath, where he had been held by the two people who loved him more than anything. This was where the journey began. He stood there for a long time, absorbing the quiet energy, allowing the memories to wash over him. He felt the presence of his parents so strongly. It was almost as if they were standing beside him, their hands on his shoulders, whispering encouragement. It was a profound connection to his origins, a spiritual homecoming. He knew he couldn't stay forever in this sacred space, but he wanted to commit every detail to memory, to imprint it on his soul. He wanted to carry the feeling of this room, the love that permeated its very walls with him always. It was a reminder of where he came from, what truly mattered, and the enduring strength of family love. He finally exhaled a long, shaky breath and turned to leave the bedroom, ready to explore the other heart of the home, the kitchen, where Gladys had truly reigned. Moving out of the bedroom, Elvis found himself back in the small main room, but now his focus shifted to the area where his father, Vernon, would have spent his time. It was a small, unassuming space, probably where Vernon kept his few tools, or where he would sit after a long day of work, quiet and contemplative. Elvis remembered his father as a man of few words, but immense strength and integrity. Vernon wasn't the flamboyant type like Gladys sometimes could be, with her dramatic expressions and infectious laughter. Vernon was steady, reliable, a quiet pillar of their family. He worked hard sometimes, at odd jobs, sometimes struggling to find work at all, especially during the lean years of the Depression. Elvis could almost see Vernon sitting at the small wooden table, his brow furrowed in concentration as he sorted through bills, trying to make the meager income stretch. He remembered the worried lines around his father's eyes, the quiet burden he carried to provide for his family. But even in the hardest times, Vernon never complained. He remembered Vernon teaching him little things, how to whittle wood, how to tie a proper knot, how to be a good man, taught Elvis the value of hard work, of honesty, and of perseverance. Vernon might not have sung him lullabies or told him bedtime stories, but his love was just as deep, expressed through his unwavering presence and tireless efforts. Elvis recalled a specific memory. It was a cold winter night, and a wind howled outside. Rattling the single-pane windows, the tiny house felt even smaller, colder. Vernon had spent the day chopping wood, his hands raw and calloused, just to keep the small stove burning. That night, Elvis remembered seeing his father huddled by the stove, rubbing his hands together, his face smudged with soot, yet a quiet determination in his eyes. He wasn't doing it for himself. He was doing it for his family, to keep them warm. That image had stayed with Elvis his entire life, the quiet sacrifice of a father's love. He also remembered the deep bond between Vernon and Gladys. Despite their struggles, their love for each other was evident. They supported each other, leaned on each other. They were a team. Vernon admired Gladys's vivacity and strength, and Gladys relied on Vernon's steadiness and moral compass. Their marriage was a testament to enduring love in the face of adversity. Elvis walked to the small corner where Vernon might have kept his tools. He could almost smell the faint scent of sawdust, of oil, of the honest labor that his father poured into his work. Vernon was a man who worked with his hands, building and repairing, always finding a way to make ends meet. He instilled in Elvis a similar resourcefulness, a belief that you could always find a way if you tried hard enough. He thought of the many times Vernon would come home tired, but always with a smile for his son. He remembered being picked up, swung high in the air, the world spinning in happy circles. Those were simple joys, but they were profound. They were the moments that built a loving family, moment by moment. His thoughts then shifted fully to Gladys, whose presence was undeniably the strongest force in this house. If Vernon was the steady foundation, Gladys was the vibrant beating heart. Kitchen, the next room he planned to enter, was undeniably Gladys's domain, but her spirit permeated every inch of this humble home. She was the one who filled the silence with song, who chased away his fears with a gentle touch, who made sure he always felt safe and cherished, no matter how little they had. He remembered her singing gospel hymns while she worked, her voice clear and pure filling the small rooms. He remembered her boundless energy despite the constant toil. She was always cooking, cleaning, mending, tending to him. She made magic out of nothing, turning simple ingredients into nourishing meals, turning worn-out clothes into something new again. Gladys had taught him the importance of faith, of relying on God in tough times. She took him to church, instilled in him the values of kindness, humility, and generosity. These were the lessons that stayed with him even as the world around him changed drastically. He felt a deep pang of longing for her. She had been gone for so many years, but her memory was as vivid as if she were still here, bustling around him. The biggest sorrow of his life had been losing her too soon, before she could truly see the full extent of his success, before he could truly spoil her the way he always dreamed of doing. He had always wanted to give her everything. She never had to make up for all the hardships she'd faced. Standing in the quiet living room, Elvis closed his eyes. He pictured Vernon quiet and strong, perhaps reading a newspaper or simply resting. Then he pictured Gladys, vibrant and loving, her face lit up by a smile. They were the architects of his world, the ones who shaped him, loved him and set him on his path. This house was a monument to their love, their sacrifice, and their unwavering belief in him. He was ready now to step into Gladys's heart, the kitchen, and relive the warmth and comfort she had so freely given. The kitchen. This was the heart of the home, the undeniable domain of Gladys Presley. As Elvis stepped into the tiny room, a wave of warmth seemed to envelop him, a sensation far beyond the humid air outside. It was the warmth of countless meals prepared with love, of whispered confidences, of laughter echoing off the low ceiling. The room was even smaller than a living room and bedroom, just big enough for a small wood-burning stove, a simple work table, and perhaps a small cabinet. There was no refrigerator in the early days, just a cool box for perishable items, or maybe a trip to the ice house. It was a stark contrast to the sprawling state of the art kitchen at Graceland, filled with modern appliances and a team of cooks. Yet this humble space held more true nourishment for his soul. He could almost smell the familiar aromas, hot biscuits baking, the rich scent of coffee, the savory goodness of fried chicken, or a pot of beans simmering. Gladys was a magician in this kitchen, turning meager ingredients into satisfying meals. She had an uncanny ability to stretch every penny to make something delicious out of what seemed like nothing. He remembered sitting at the small table, his legs dangling, watching his mother work. Her hands, though often calloused from hard labor, were always gentle and swift as she kneaded dough or peeled potatoes. She would hum gospel tunes as she worked, her voice a comforting background to the everyday sounds of the kitchen. One specific memory bloomed vividly in his mind. It was a cold, rainy day, and he had come in shivering, soaked to the bone from playing outside. Gladys had immediately taken off his wet clothes, wrapped him in a warm blanket, and then sat him by the stove. She had made him a cup of hot chocolate, thick and sweet, and brought him a piece of warm cornbread slathered with butter. The simple act had been a profound gesture of love and comfort. He could still feel the warmth spreading through him, chasing away the chill. It wasn't just the food, it was the love infused into every bite. He remembered her patient lessons. How to crack an egg without getting shells in the bowl, how to stir batter just right. He wasn't much of a cook himself, but these memories were imprinted on his soul. There were lessons in care, in providing, in nurturing. The stove, though cold and long unused, felt like a living entity. He remembered the crackle of the wood, the flicker of the flame, the cozy heat it radiated on cold mornings. Gladys would rise before dawn, even in the depths of winter, to get the fire going, to ensure the house was warm for Vernon, and for him her selfless devotion was boundless. He looked at the small window above the sink. Through it, he remembered watching the rain fall, or the sun rise, or just the everyday life of the neighborhood unfolding. This window was a portal to the world outside, but this kitchen was a self-contained universe of love and security. He imagined Gladys standing there, perhaps washing dishes in a basin, humming a hymn. He could almost hear her voice saying, "Eat up, baby. You need your strength." She worried about his slight frame, always trying to put more meat on his bones. Her concern was a constant, comforting presence. It wasn't just about food, though this kitchen was also where they shared their days. Vernon would come in tired from work, and Gladys would listen patiently as he recounted his day. They would discuss their small triumphs and their larger struggles, always as a unit. And young Elvis, perched on a stool or playing quietly nearby, absorbed it all, learning about life, about family, about resilience. He felt a profound sense of peace, pure and abundant. It wasn't tainted by fame or money or expectations. It was just the heart of a family beating strong and true. Closed his eyes, letting the memory of Gladys fill the space. Her laughter, her gentle touch, the way she would look at him with such fierce protective love. He missed her terribly. But in this moment, in this tiny kitchen, she felt closer than she had in years. It was as if her spirit lingered here, a warm, comforting embrace. This house, this kitchen, was where he learned the most important lessons of his life. The value of family, the strength of faith, the joy in simple pleasures, and the profound power of unconditional love. These lessons had shaped him, kept him grounded, even as his world turned upside down. He took a slow, deep breath, trying to capture the essence of this moment, to hold on to the feeling of Gladys's presence. He knew he had to move on, to explore the outdoor spaces, but he carried the warmth of this kitchen with him. As he quietly stepped out, ready to remember the world beyond its walls. Stepping out of the small kitchen, Elvis moved back through the main living area and slowly approached the front door. The sunlight, though muted through the small panes, beckoned him. Pushed open the door and stepped onto the small, weathered front porch. The porch felt exactly as he remembered it, though perhaps a little smaller, a little more worn. The wood planks creaked faintly under his weight, a familiar, comforting sound. He remembered sitting here for hours as a child, his legs dangling over the edge, watching the world go by. The view hadn't changed drastically. The dirt road was now paved, but the general layout of the neighborhood remained. He remembered the neighboring houses, the friendly faces of Mrs. Green and Mr. Johnson. This porch was the stage for so many childhood scenes. He recalled playing marbles in the dirt patch just off the porch, his knees stained with earth, fiercely concentrating on his aim. He remembered games of hide and seek, the porch serving as home base, the shouts and laughter of children echoing through the hot Tupelo air. They didn't have many toys, but their imaginations were limitless. Sticks became swords, rocks became treasures, and the yard became a vast, wild kingdom. He remembered the feel of the sun on his face, the taste of dust on his tongue. After a long day of play, the air hummed with the sound of cicadas in summer, a constant buzzing symphony that was the soundtrack to his early years. He could almost hear them now, a faint echo in his memory. Sometimes in the evenings, his mother would sit on the porch, fanning herself with a newspaper, while Vernon smoked his pipe nearby. They would talk in low, comforting tones, discussing the day, the neighbors, their hopes for the future. Elvis would listen half asleep, absorbing the rhythm of their voices, the security of their presence. This porch was also where he first started to sing, beyond the confines of the church. He remembered sometimes singing along with the radio or just making up his own tunes, shyly at first. Gladys would always encourage him, her eyes beaming with pride. "That's my boy," she'd say. "You got a voice, baby." Her belief in him was absolute, a powerful force that gave him the courage to keep singing. He remembered gospel music drifting through the air from the nearby churches on Sunday mornings. The powerful, soul-stirring harmonies would carry on the breeze, filling the air with a sense of hope and spiritual uplift. Those sounds were deeply ingrained in him, shaping his musical sensibilities long before he ever heard rhythm and blues or rock and roll. He envisioned himself as a small boy sitting right here, perhaps humming a hymn or daydreaming about distant places. He was a quiet, sensitive child, often lost in his own thoughts, observing the world around him. This porch was his observation deck, his private theater. He recalled the simplicity of life then. No demanding schedules, no relentless travel, no constant public scrutiny. Just the rhythm of the days, the changing seasons, the comfort of family and community. It was a life of hard work, but also one of genuine connection and simple, honest joys. He remembered the neighbor's dog trotting by, the familiar faces of people walking past waving a greeting. There was a strong sense of community here, a feeling of belonging. Everyone knew everyone, and people looked out for each other. It was a stark contrast to the anonymity and isolation that sometimes came with his later fame. He leaned against one of the weathered wooden posts, feeling the rough texture against his back. He closed his eyes, letting the memories wash over him like a warm tide. He could almost feel the phantom touch of his mother's hand on his head, ruffling his hair. He could almost hear his father's gentle chuckle. This porch, this small, unassuming space, held the essence of his early childhood. It was where he dreamed, where he played, where he was simply Elvis Aaron, a beloved son and a loving family. It was a reminder of innocence, of the quiet beauty of a life unburdened by fame. He opened his eyes, a faint smile playing on his lips. The world might have changed drastically, but the core of who he was had been forged right here on this porch, in this small, simple house. He took one last look, imprinting the image deeply in his mind before turning to revisit another crucial landmark of his early life, the church that had helped shape his soul. Leaving the humble birthplace behind, Elvis asked Billy to drive him to the old Assembly of God church. It wasn't far, just a short drive through the quiet streets of Tupelo. As they approached, Elvis felt a familiar swell of emotion, a mix of reverence and profound gratitude. The church building stood much as he remembered it, a simple, modest structure, yet it radiated an aura of deep spiritual significance for him. It wasn't grand or ornate, just a clean, well-kept building with a spire reaching towards the sky. It was here, within these very walls, that he truly discovered the power of music and the depth of his faith. He remembered being brought here as a small boy by his mother, Gladys. She was deeply religious, and she instilled in him a strong belief in God and the importance of faith. Sunday mornings were sacred. They would dress in their best, often patched-up clothes, and walk together to the church hand in hand. The moment he stepped inside, the air seemed to hum with the echoes of hymns and fervent prayers. The wooden pews were still there, worn smooth by generations of worshipers. The altar was simple, adorned with a plain cross. The stained glass windows, though not elaborate, cast colorful patterns of light onto the floor when the sun shone through. He remembered sitting in those pews, a quiet, observant child. At first he might have fidgeted, as any young boy would. But then the music would begin. The rousing gospel hymns, sung with passion and conviction by the congregation, filled the small sanctuary. The sounds of clapping hands, stomping feet, and voices raised in joyful praise were electrifying. He recalled feeling an almost physical sensation as the music washed over him. It was a feeling of pure emotion, of shared spirituality, of profound connection. It wasn't just sounds. It was a force that vibrated through his very being. This was where he first understood the power of a voice, the way it could move people, stir their souls, lift them up. Gladys, with her beautiful clear voice, would sing along with gusto, often swaying to the rhythm. She encouraged Elvis to sing too, and he would join in, his young voice blending with hers. He remembered feeling a thrill, a sense of belonging when his voice became part of that glorious sound. He remembered the call in response of the preacher's sermon, the shouts of Amen and Hallelujah from the congregation. It was an environment of uninhibited expression, of raw, honest emotion. This unbridled passion, this connection between speaker and audience, singer and listener, would later become a hallmark of his own performances. This church was where he first stepped onto a stage, even if it was just a small platform. He remembered participating in talent shows, his heart pounding, his voice trembling at first, but then growing stronger as he felt the encouraging gazes of his mother in the congregation. He sang gospel songs, the melodies deeply ingrained in his spirit. He won a prize once at the Mississippi-Alabama Fair and Dairy Show, and it was a moment of immense pride for his family. That early success, born in this humble setting, fueled his desire to perform, to share his voice with others. He thought of the messages of hope and redemption he heard in this church. Growing up in poverty, facing hardship, faith was their anchor. It taught him resilience, patience, and the belief that even in the darkest times there was always light. These were lessons he carried with him through the dizzying highs and sometimes lonely lows of his career. He walked slowly down the aisle, his hand brushing against the backs of the pews. He stopped at the front, looking up at the altar. He remembered kneeling here, praying, feeling a sense of peace and divine connection. It was here that he truly learned the meaning of grace, of unconditional love, both from God and from his devoted parents. The church wasn't just a building. It was a crucible where his spirit was forged, where his musical inclinations were nurtured, and where his moral compass was set. It was a place of comfort, of community, of profound inspiration. He closed his eyes, letting the silence of the empty church fill him. He imagined the joyful noise of a Sunday service, the swelling harmonies, the clapping hands. He felt a deep sense of gratitude for this place, for the lessons it taught him, for the foundation it laid. This was where the shy boy, Elvis Aaron Presley, began to find his voice. A voice that would eventually captivate millions around the world. It was a powerful reminder that true greatness often emerges from the humblest of beginnings, nurtured by faith, family, and the simple soulful sound of hope. He turned to leave, knowing the next stop would complete the circle of his musical awakening, the memory of his first guitar. After the quiet reverence of the church, Elvis asked Billy to drive him back towards the birthplace home, but not to stop there. He wanted to park a little ways down the road, to walk, to absorb the atmosphere of the neighborhood where his musical journey truly began. He remembered when he was 10 or 11 years old, longing for a bicycle. But Gladys, ever practical and keenly aware of his budding musical talent, convinced him otherwise. It was a moment etched in his memory, a pivotal decision that changed the course of his life. He walked along the now paved road, remembering the dusty track it once was. Pictured himself as a boy, a skinny kid with big ears and even bigger dreams, walking with his mother. They had gone to Tupelo Hardware Company, a place that still existed, a landmark from his childhood. He remembered the anticipation, the longing for that bicycle. But then his mother, with her gentle wisdom, had steered him towards something else. "Baby," she'd said, "a guitar will last you longer than a bicycle, and it's something you can truly make your own." Could still see the guitar in the store hanging on a hook. It wasn't fancy. Just a simple acoustic 6-string, probably a cheap model, but to him it was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen. He remembered the feel of the wood, smooth and cool under his fingers, the taut strings, the faint woody smell. Gladys, ever resourceful, managed to buy it for him. It was a sacrifice, no doubt, but she knew it was an investment in his passion, in his future. He remembered the joy of carrying it home, walking this very road, the guitar, feeling impossibly large and precious in his young hands. He pictured himself back in that tiny house, sitting on the edge of his bed or perhaps on the living room floor, carefully plucking at the strings. The sounds were clumsy at first, discordant, nothing like the smooth melodies he heard on the radio or in church, but he persisted. He remembered his father, Vernon, sometimes offering quiet encouragement, maybe showing him a chord or two if he knew any, though Vernon wasn't musical. But it was Gladys. Who was... She would sit and listen patiently, her eyes full of pride, even when his effort sounded more like a cat fighting than a song. "Keep practicing, baby," she'd say. "You get it. You got music in your soul." He recalled countless hours spent with that guitar. He'd listen to country songs on the radio, trying to pick out the melodies by ear. He'd try to mimic the gospel singers he admired, learning the chords, feeling the rhythm. Take hold of him, the guitar became an extension of himself, a way to express the emotions bubbling inside him. Emotions he often found difficult to put into words. The small house, once filled with the sounds of daily life, now also vibrated with the nascent sounds of his musical exploration. It wasn't always harmonious, but it was alive. It was the sound of a dream taking root. He remembered the frustrations, the sore fingertips, the moments when he thought he'd never get it right. Then a chord would ring true, a melody would emerge, and he'd feel a thrill that propelled him forward. It was a magical feeling, the first taste of true artistic creation. This was where he learned the discipline of practice, the joy of mastering something, the power of perseverance. This was where he understood that music wasn't just entertainment. It was a language, a way to connect, a way to express the deepest parts of himself. He thought of all the guitars he'd owned. Since then, countless expensive custom-made instruments sparkling with rhinestones, played on grand stages before millions, but none of them held the significance of that first humble acoustic guitar. That was the one that truly started it all. That was the one that Gladys gave him. He could almost feel the phantom weight of it in his hands, the vibrations of its strings against his chest. It wasn't just wood and wire. It was a symbol of his mother's belief, his parents' sacrifice, and his own burgeoning destiny. He reached the end of the road near where his old home stood. He stopped and looked back down the path he had just walked. This simple road, this simple house, the simple guitar, they were the building blocks of his extraordinary life. They were the roots that anchored him even when the winds of fame tried to pull him in every direction. Closed his eyes again, taking a deep breath of the Tupelo air, the scent of pine, the hum of distant life. It all conspired to bring him back to that shy boy, holding his first guitar, strumming his first notes, unaware that those humble beginnings would lead to a revolution. He opened his eyes, a profound sense of gratitude in his heart. This was the moment he truly became Elvis the musician. The memories of the guitar and his early musical stirrings led inevitably to the next bittersweet chapter. Leaving Tupelo, Elvis walked back towards the house, the sun now casting long shadows, signaling the approaching end of his visit. The air was still warm, but a subtle shift had occurred, mirroring the internal shift he felt within himself. He stood by the small wooden gate of his birthplace, looking at the tiny house. One last time from the outside, he remembered the day they left. He was 13 years old, and Vernon and Gladys had made the difficult decision to move to Memphis. Tupelo, for all its love and familiarity, couldn't offer them the opportunities they desperately needed. Memphis, a bigger city, held the promise of better jobs, a chance for a fresh start. He remembered the mixed emotions of that day. Excitement for the unknown, a natural curiosity that tugged at every young boy's heart. But beneath it, a deep ache of leaving behind everything he had ever known. His friends, his school, the church, the familiar faces, and most painfully this little house that had been the entirety of his world. He recalled loading their few meager possessions into a relative's old car clothes, a few pieces of furniture, and his most prized possession, that guitar. There wasn't much. They were leaving behind poverty, but also a profound sense of community and rootedness. He remembered Gladys's brave smile, trying to reassure him, but he could see the sadness in her eyes too. Vernon, as always, was stoic, focused on the road ahead. But Elvis knew it was hard for him too, leaving his home state. The drive to Memphis wasn't long in distance, but it felt like a journey across a vast ocean. It was a definitive break from one life and the hesitant step into another. He was just a shy teenager holding onto his guitar, carrying the music of Tupelo gospel and country in his heart, heading towards a city that would change his destiny forever. Memphis brought its own struggles. More poverty, living in different small apartments, Vernon working long hours. But it also brought Sun Records, Sam Phillips, and the explosion of rock and roll, brought the fusion of the gospel country and blues. He'd absorbed, creating a sound that was uniquely his. He thought of the rapid ascent to fame, the first record, the first radio play, the first screaming crowds, the transition from that shy boy on the Tupelo porch to Elvis the Pelvis electrifying audiences across the nation, the dizzying speed of it all. It was a dream come true beyond anything he could have ever imagined in that little house, but fame, he reflected, was a double-edged sword. It brought incredible wealth, adoration, and the ability to give his parents everything they never had. He'd bought them homes, cars, clothes, spoiling them in ways he'd always longed to. He wanted to make up for every hardship, every sacrifice. Yet fame also brought its own kind of isolation. The constant demands, the loss of privacy, the inability to walk down a street unnoticed. The loneliness that sometimes crept in despite being surrounded by millions. The weight of being the king, a symbol, a phenomenon, rather than just a man. He thought of the sacrifices, the time spent away from family, the constant pressure to perform, to be the best, to live up to the impossible expectations. He missed the simple joys, the quiet moments he'd known here in Tupelo. He remembered the pain of losing Gladys too soon, just as his career was reaching its zenith. He had wanted to give her so much more, to share all his success with her. Her passing left a void in his heart that nothing, not fame, not money, could ever fill. She was the one person who loved him unconditionally before the world demanded it. Standing at the gate, looking back at the house, he realized how profoundly this humble home had shaped his resilience. The lessons of perseverance from Vernon, the boundless love and faith from Gladys, the simplicity and groundedness of this community. These were the internal anchors that kept him from being completely swept away by the maelstrom of fame. He carried Tupelo with him always. Even in the grandest of mansions, even on the largest of stages. The core of Elvis Aaron Presley, the boy from Old Saltillo Road, never truly left this place. It was in his voice, in his soul, in the very essence of his music. He reached out and gently touched the worn wooden gate, a silent farewell to a past he would forever. He was ready to leave, but he knew he wasn't really leaving. He was simply carrying a renewed sense of himself, a deeper appreciation for his roots, and a profound, heartwarming understanding of where he truly came from. The journey back to Tupelo had brought him full circle, grounding him, reminding him that the greatest treasures in his life were never the gold records or the sold-out stadiums, but the simple, unwavering love that had begun right here. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, painting the Tupelo sky in hues of orange and purple. Elvis stood for a final moment at the gate of his childhood home, the silence around him deep and profound. It was a different kind of quiet from the one he experienced at Graceland. Not the echoing stillness of a large, sometimes empty mansion, but the comforting hush of a place steeped in loving history. He looked at the small house one last time, truly seeing it, not just with his eyes, but with his heart. It wasn't just a building, it was a vessel of memories, a testament to resilience, a monument to love. Every splinter in the wood, every faded patch of paint whispered stories of the boy who became a legend. He had walked these rooms, touched these walls, breathed this air, and in doing so he had walked through his own history. He had reconnected with the shy, sensitive boy named Elvis Aaron, a boy full of dreams, nurtured by the boundless love of his parents, Vernon and Gladys. The glitz and glamour of his life, the roaring crowds, the flashbulbs, the extravagant wealth, it all seemed so distant, almost irrelevant in the face of this profound simplicity. This little house had taught him the most important lessons: the value of family, the strength of faith, the beauty of honest work, and the immeasurable power of unconditional love. These were the true riches, the ones that money couldn't buy and fame couldn't diminish. He understood now more deeply than ever that his unique sound, his magnetic stage presence, his very soul as an artist was forged in this crucible of poverty and profound love. The gospel music from the church, the blues from the radio, the country songs his parents loved, all mixed with the raw emotion of growing up with little and wanting to make something of himself. It all came from here. Her spirit felt so strong, so present in every corner of the house. Her unwavering belief in him, her constant encouragement, her protective love, these were the forces that launched him. He had always wanted to give her the world, to make up for all the hardship she endured in a way by becoming the king. But her greatest joy, he knew, was simply seeing him happy, seeing him use the talent she nurtured. He felt a sense of peace settle over him, a quiet contentment he hadn't experienced in years. This visit wasn't just about nostalgia. It was about healing, about grounding himself, about remembering the core of who he was before the world demanded he be something else. It was a reminder that despite all the accolades and the pressures, he was still at heart that same boy from Tupelo. He took a slow, deliberate breath, letting the evening air fill his lungs. The cicadas were starting their nightly chorus. A familiar soundtrack, the scent of pine and honeysuckle was strong, comforting. This was home. He turned and walked slowly back to the waiting Cadillac. Billy, ever discreet, opened the door for him without a word. Elvis slid into the back seat. The plush leather, a stark contrast to the rough wood of the porch. He'd just left as the car pulled away. He turned to look back. The little house on Old Saltillo Road grew smaller in the rear-view mirror, bathed in the soft glow of twilight. It wasn't just a house. It was a powerful symbol. A symbol of his beginnings, of his parents' enduring love, of the humble roots that shaped a legend he knew. He would carry this feeling with him, the warmth, the gratitude, the renewed sense of self. Tupelo had given him more than just a birthplace. It had given him his soul. And as the car sped away, leaving the quiet town behind, Elvis Presley felt a deep, abiding connection to his past, and a heartwarming sense of peace for the journey ahead. He was, and always would be, just a boy from Tupelo, Mississippi, who found his voice in a small, loving home and shared it with the world, and that, he realized, was the greatest legacy of all.